So if you don't follow Apex Legends super closely, this one could have slipped past you pretty easily, but essentially a Respawn employee tweeted out saying that soon there was going to be a Wattson balance change put into a future patch, but in this tweet he also said that it would be a nerf and not a buff, which pretty much goes against what the Apex Legends community has been asking for an extremely long period of time now. Everybody thinks that Wattson actually needs a buff. So a pro player called Sweet responds with his thoughts about the topic, and Apex Twitter begins this debate. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of the video, I just want to remind you guys to subscribe to the channel and click all the links in the description down below, especially the Twitch one, since I stream extremely often. Come talk to me over there. But anyways, let's get into it. First things first, I just want to be clear when I say that nobody deserves any hate or harassment for this situation at all. Everybody in the situation was simply giving their opinions and debating. There was no hate involved at all. Respawn is a great dev team that works very hard, and they do their absolute best at all times. And all players deserve to be heard as well. That's just the way it is. But anyways, let's get back to the subject. So, after Daniel, the lead game designer for Apex, said they were probably shipping a Wattson Nerf next patch, Sweet replies and says, "You failed to account for player type when it comes to win rate. Wattson players aren't hot dropping off spawn, dying 30 games in a row like Wraith and Lifelines are. Wattson is, without a doubt, the worst legend currently in Apex in terms of usability and having fun," which is a valid concern if you ask me. The fact of the matter is, different people play different characters differently, and in general, Wattson players are more reserved and don't hot drop as much as cracked out Wraith and Octane players do, for example. Daniel responds to this in a way that I would say wasn't the best, but he says, "Please do this job for a living for a few years before you tell other people how to do it. There's no reason to assume your theory is the explanation when there's a much simpler explanation. In parentheses, Wattson is strong but no fun to play." Now, this tweet, when I read it, seemed very dismissing and as if Daniel didn't really consider Sweet's point of view. I'm sure that's not true and Daniel just misworded his tweet, but it happens. But anyways, Sweet responds to this tweet by saying, "You've fallen for the fallacy of Occam's razor," I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, "failing to do equal research on both penalties before defaulting to the simplest one." Now, this is an extremely valid argument by Sweet here. The way Daniel's tweet read, he seemed to dismiss Sweet's theory based off the fact that his theory was simpler, and therefore making more sense. So Sweet brought up the point that you shouldn't default to the simplest option. You should instead fully research all of your available options and decide based on the information you gathered. That was the end of the discussion between the two, and it seemed Sweet Logic's held up a bit better than Daniel's in this situation. But now we get to delve a little deeper into both arguments. First, let's tackle Sweet's point of view. Step into his shoes with me here, okay? You're a pro player and content creator for Apex Legends. You spend the majority of your time playing, thinking, and discussing Apex Legends. You know how each legend behaves in game, in all the different game modes, and at high levels of play as well. You and the entire Apex community all agree that Wattson deserves a buff. There's a reason very few people pick her and play her consistently, after all. When you play her, she doesn't feel nearly as powerful as other legends, and you don't seem to play quite as well when using her. So naturally, Wattson needs a buff in your head. And the other pros you talk to, and the more casual players within your own community all agree. So you advocate for that buff. Now let's take a second to think about Daniel's point of view. You've been in the gaming industry and worked specifically on game design for years. You've know the ins and outs of balance changes and how they normally happen. You're naturally going to defend your position based off your years of experience, the information you have, and your own opinions on the character. But let's look closer at the actual argument, and a big part of this is a tweet from before Sweet even responded, which was responding to someone else asking for a Wattson buff, but the tweet from Daniel here said, "She outperforms Wraith in lifeline and win rate," talking about Wattson here, and they have very similar hitboxes to her, which is a good point. Hitboxes are a major topic of debate in Apex Legends. What is true, I feel, is that her abilities aren't fun to use, and their power isn't felt. We can measure the power in games, we cannot measure how it feels. Here, Daniel brings up something super interesting: data. Now let me guys tell you about data analysis. I'm currently studying software engineering, so I'm in no way an expert on data analysis, but I've heard quite a bit about it. The biggest thing I can tell you is that it's hard. Data is super finicky and hard to pin down. There's a reason there are a ton of jobs where their main task is just to analyze data. Data is completely circumstantial, and one tiny thing can throw off what you're looking at. The easiest to understand example of this is that old Tumblr text post about Spider George Gorge, whatever, or however you say his name. There was an article released saying that the average human eats 3 spiders a day, and that was just a data analysis error. And the average was thrown off by a crazy outlier of Spider George who eats 10,000 spiders a day. And whether that story was true or not gives us a good example of how difficult data analysis can be. So small things such as an outlier, small sample size, or incorrect settings for the data can make the data portrayal just show incorrect things. But now let's talk about how this relates to our actual discussion. Daniel made a point about how high Wattson's win rate is. While I don't know much about the data they're looking at Respawn, we can of course theorize like crazy. So, the super high win rate that Daniel is citing as one of the main reasons for a Wattson nerf could be explained by a few different things. We could talk how it could be a small sample size because not many people are playing Wattson, causing the percentage to be much higher than it actually should be. We could talk about how the setting could be wrong. For example, they could only be examining data from certain ranks from a certain time period. The list keeps growing of ways data can be misleading. So, I think the best way to balance video games is not to only look at data, but also play the game and listen to your community and analyze gameplay. I have a very long-winded and better thought out version of how video games should be balanced and how you should go about thinking about that, but honestly, that's for a different video. Now let me give my own thoughts for a second here. I personally think that Wattson needs a buff, and I'm not sure how to do that. I haven't spent enough time with Wattson. I haven't spent enough time looking at Wattson. I can't look at Respawn's data. I can't do any of that. But I personally do think Wattson needs a buff with my limited knowledge of how it works at the moment. But anyways, this video wasn't about how to balance Wattson, but instead it was about examining the two arguments about whether she should be nerfed or buffed, coming from Sweet and coming from Daniel. I personally believe Sweet's tweets held up a bit more than Daniel's in this situation, but Daniel's tweets shouldn't be discounted at all, and his point of view should be taken seriously. In the end, game balance is an extremely difficult thing to do, and devs are trying their best. I can't say with 100% certainty what should happen without seeing all the data, which sadly I don't have access to. And in the end, devs get the final say about how they change their game. Last thing I want to say for sure though is that nobody in this situation deserves any hate at all. They are simply giving their point of views and opinions about a topic they care a lot about. But anyways guys, that's the end of the video. Make sure to give your opinions on the state of Wattson, what you think should happen to Wattson, the arguments that Sweet and Daniel had here. Make sure you put all your thoughts down in the comment section below. But also, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like me for some reason. And click all the links down in the description below. But thank you guys for watching. It does mean a lot. I will see you guys next week. Goodbye.